Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about out of your seat grammar. Now my plan for today, as the title suggests, is that we're going to be talking about ways to introduce and practice grammar in a way that is effective, engaging, interactive, out of the box, and out of your seat. Now something that I've noticed over time is that no matter how wonderful your activities are in your classes, you might have the most fantastic ideas for teaching grammar, but if you don't have a good plan for it, or if a discipline is an issue in your class, then none of it is going to go as well as you hoped for. So throughout the webinar about teaching grammar, I'm also going to be mixing in some ideas about lesson planning, classroom management, and other tips like this. Participants will finish the session with strategies and inspiration that they can use immediately. This is my hope for today. So, before I begin any webinar or any face-to-face workshop, I like to give 3 suggestions before we even start. So, the first suggestion is the idea of opening your mind a little bit to something that's new. Now, you think about the things that are already going well in your class. You think, my class is going pretty well, and then you go to a workshop, and the presenter is telling you about new idea, new idea, new idea, new idea, and you think, but wait, what I'm already doing is going well. Do I have to throw away all of my ideas already, what I'm already doing? And the thing to remember as you hear new ideas is that you don't have to throw away what's already going well. Keep what's going well and add new positive things to it to make it even better. Similarly, no one workshop or one webinar is going to be perfect for all of the people participating in it, because people are teaching different levels, they have different numbers in their class, they're doing different things, and so no one webinar is going to give the exact information that everyone in the room needs. So your job as the participant is to ask yourself, instead of asking yourself, will this workshop, will this activity work for me, yes or no? Instead, try to rephrase the question, here's an idea that's presented. How can I modify this idea so that it will work for me? And finally, remember that your colleagues are your best resource for new ideas and support. So you have an incredible network of people here on this shaping program that you can get ideas from. The people that you work with in your school community, also a good resource. And anytime that you go to a face-to-face workshop, when you have those 5 minutes when you sit down before the presenter begins, that's a great opportunity to share ideas, sit down and say, hey, what's going well in your class? And who knows, maybe in those 5 minutes you'll get some really good ideas. I encourage you after this webinar and after all of the webinars that you participate in this program, that you go back to your colleagues at school and share with them about what you've learned, and then it'll come around to you again next time when somebody else goes to a workshop and learns something new. In this way, we can all benefit from professional development opportunities. Before we began this webinar, we answered some pre-webinar discussion questions, and you told me a little bit about some information that I had asked you about. You told us about typical grammar lessons in your class. I heard about people who had very large classes. I heard about people who had a textbook that they had to follow, and so this was a challenge. And so we're going to be talking about a lot of these things in this session. As I said, the biggest challenges, that's another question that I asked you about, and I heard about big classes. I heard about needing to get through a certain amount of chapters every week. These were some of the challenges that you mentioned, so I hope that I can touch on those. Thinking about your own experiences learning a new language, what things inside or outside of class were most effective for you? A lot of people turned in answers for this question and said things like, you know, what was really helpful for me was actually using the language. Or what was really useful was when I was forced to use it because somebody else didn't speak that language, and so I really had to use my second language. These are some things that you answered, and I think that that's important to remember. Sometimes when we go into the classroom, no matter what kind of things that worked for us, sometimes it's tempting to go back to maybe the style that our teachers used for us, even if it wasn't the most effective way. And so I want to always have people keep in mind what really was useful. Really using the language is the answer that a lot of you gave. And so in today's session, we're going to be talking about getting students to really, really use the English and use the grammar. What would make teaching grammar easier or more effective was another question that I asked you, and a lot of people answered that more materials, more resources, more technology could be very helpful. And I agree that those things do help, and sometimes not having those things can be very challenging. I agree. But what I've done today is I've thought about, okay, those things are challenging. It's challenging not to have a good printer, to be able to print out good materials and all this. And that's unfortunately something that we probably cannot change overnight. And so what I would like to do today is think about how can we overcome those challenges. If we don't have all the materials in the world that we would like, what can we do? And so I've tried to put together activities that you can do even with limited resources so that you can make it work. Today we're going to be doing a sample lesson with the future using going to. Now remember that I said at the beginning of the session that not every workshop is perfect for everybody. What I mean is I understand that not all of you are teaching future with going to in your next class, and that's fine. Of course that's no problem, because what you can do is think about how you can make these activities work for you. Almost all of the activities that I introduce can be modified for any other tense, any different level, and so we'll talk about how you can do that, but keep that in mind as we go through the lesson. Before we begin the lesson, before you begin any lesson, of course you need to create your objective. What's your objective for the class? My 3 tips for creating an objective are as follows. We need to be very specific, we need to be reasonable, and we need to know how we will know when students have reached the objective. In the chat box, I'd like to give you a minute to send in an objective. Let's imagine that we are all going to be teaching a lesson on future with going to tomorrow, and you all need to create your objective for that class, keeping in mind these 3 suggestions that I just offered. Let's go ahead and do that now. In fact, we're going to listen to a quick song to keep time for a minute and to add a comfortable, fun environment to the class as we are doing this task. So go ahead and do that now.
I think of you when you think of me. I respect you when you respect me. I think of you when you think of me.
Thanks everybody. I'm getting some really good responses back about your objective. Nice work. I'm hearing from Carlos in Venezuela, Maria in Lima. Thanks for your ideas. I'd like to give you some examples for discussion, and these are reflecting the ideas I'm hearing back from a lot of you. So let's examine these 3 objectives. One teacher writes, I will teach the future with going to as a possible objective. Now that's a nice idea. That's your idea for the class. That's true. But when we're thinking about the objective, we want to be thinking about what the students will walk away with. Not so much as what the teacher will do, but what will the students be able to do by the time they leave the class. And so the second try is a little bit closer. Students will be able to use future with going to. So this is stating what students will be able to do at the end of the class, which is good. Future with going to, I mean, that is the idea, But we want to be, going back to the third tip that we have for writing an objective, we want to be, how are we going to know when students have reached that goal? We need to be reasonable and know what that means. How do we know when we have reached our goal? So I think the third example here is probably the best. Students will be able to tell us at least 5 things that they are going to do this weekend using the future going to. So it's specific, it's reasonable. Probably by the end of one class they would be able to tell us 5 things, and we will know when they have reached their objective, and they will also know because they will be able to do this task before leaving class. So thanks for all of your ideas, and I think we have a better idea now about writing a clear objective. And now we're ready to create the lesson plan. So I've added here a sample lesson plan template for creating a lesson plan. I'm sure that you have your own templates that work for you. Here's my idea. So first, of course, we enter the learning objective that we have just created. And then there's 5 categories here in the lesson plan that I'd like to talk about. First, the time. We need to make an estimate about how long each activity we think is going to take. Of course, this is just a guess. Maybe you think it's going to take 3 minutes and you get it done in 1, or the other way around, it takes a little bit longer. But I think the more we try to make guesses about how long activities are going to take, the better we get at making that prediction. And this can help us manage our time a little bit better. I always bring my lesson plan into class and I see what my plan was. I thought it was going to take 5 minutes, and then when it really took 6 or 7 or whatever it was, I write down the actual time so that that will help me for next time make a better guess. This helps me get better at guessing each time. Next, of course, we write the activity. What are we planning to do during that time? And then the third category is interaction. This is an important category when you're trying to make sure that you have different interaction formats in your class. And so the T indicates the teacher, and the S indicates student, and the double S, students plural. So for example, if it's teacher talking to the whole group, we have the first example, T to students. If it's student to student partner work, SS. If all the students are working together, you can see how that looks. This helps me make sure that I'm having variety in my class in terms of who's working with who, in terms of how much talking the students are actually doing versus how much I'm talking. And of course the goal is to get students talking as much as possible. So this column in my lesson plan has really been helpful for me. Next, we write about materials, what materials are you going to need to bring. As you're running out the door on your way to class, it's helpful to check really quick your lesson plan, your materials column, to make sure, do I have the markers? Do I have the chart paper? This is a quick way to check to see if you have everything that you really need. The final column is notes. And this can be anything that you need it to be. Sometimes I write things such as, this is how I'm going to get the students into partners. This is how I'm going to help them find their group. Or perhaps this student and that student should not work together. Or remember that Susan usually doesn't bring her glasses, and so I should try to make sure that she sits at the front of the room. Anything like this that you think would be helpful to write a note about. Also, even after the fact, as I'm doing each activity, I always write notes in there so that next time I can remember that for doing it better in the future. So notes are meant to be beforehand and also as you're doing it or afterwards. Finally, you see at the bottom of my lesson plan, I have a column or an area for extra time. There's nothing worse than, especially if you're a newer teacher, there's no worse feeling than getting through all of your activities that you wanted to do on the lesson plan and looking up at the clock and realizing that you have 20 minutes more in your class and thinking, wow, I have no idea what to do. And I find that especially at the beginning of a new semester, when I have a new group of students who are shy and maybe not sharing as much as they later would when they're more comfortable, I tend to go through activities a little bit quicker than normal. And so it's always, no matter what, a good idea to have an extra plan, a plan B. What am I going to do if I have extra time? Another thing that often happens is maybe you're planning to do a certain activity, maybe you're planning to use some kind of technology that fails you, and so, wow, I was going to use that for 20 minutes of my time and now I can't. The CD player is not working or whatever it is. What are you going to do? So always important to add this category. Okay, once we have the first draft of our lesson plan done, there's a few questions that you might want to ask yourself to go back and check your work. Make sure there's variety in your lesson plan. So variety in terms of these 5 categories. Is there variety in terms of the 4 skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing? I find that the most effective classes have all 4 of those skills included. Maybe you spend more or less time on certain ones, but if they're all included in some way, I think that makes a really great class. Second, is there variety in terms of how students are working? Are they working individually, in pairs, in groups? And that takes you back to the category that I mentioned before about the interaction. That's an easy way to check to see if you have variety in that department. No matter how great I may think group work is, if you're doing group work the whole time, that can be a little bit too much. So I think that you really do need to have a little bit of everything. Next, is there variety in terms of accuracy versus fluency? What do I mean by this? Accuracy is when perhaps you've just introduced something new, perhaps we've just introduced future with going to, we've been examining the structure of it, and I want to make sure now that we've been practicing it a little bit that everyone is getting it right. I want to make sure that they have the format down. And so I'm going to ask each student and listen very carefully to their answer and see if it's right or wrong, see if they've got it or see if we need more time on it. That's what I mean by accuracy. Fluency, on the other hand, is when you just want to get students talking. A lot of times in workshops when I've introduced the idea of having students do a conversation rotation or the sort of thing where all the students are talking to a partner at the same time and the teacher isn't necessarily hearing each pair talk, sometimes teachers hesitate about this idea because they say, Vicki, how am I supposed to be able to correct them? How am I supposed to hear their mistakes if they're all talking at the same time? I can't hear all of them at the same time if they're all talking. So maybe somebody's going to make a mistake and I'm going to miss it. So I'm not sure if that's such a good idea. Maybe I should only do activities in which I hear their responses every time. And I understand the hesitation because there is a time when you just want to hear each student and make sure they're getting it right to see if you need more time on it or not. But there are also moments when you just need to get the students talking, using it, having fun with it. And that's what I mean by fluency. And you do need both. So make sure you have time and activities that allow you to do both. Next, you need differences in terms of speed. Some fast activities, some slow activities. So make sure there's variety in terms of the pace of the activities. And then finally, standing versus sitting. Now I've taught students from ages 5 to probably 85, kids as well as adults. All, no matter how motivated, determined they are, they can all tend to get a little bit sleepy if they're just sitting there doing nothing in the same spot for an hour, hour and a half. And so even if you're one of those people who has a class of 60 people with desks literally nailed to the floor and you think, I can't do too much group work, I just don't have the space for that, everyone can get students standing and sitting at least a little bit. For example, okay, let's say we're studying members of the family, and so I want this whole class of 60, anyone who has a daughter, stand up. Okay, now sit down. Okay, anybody that has a brother, stand up. So a quick thing like that can be a good way, more than anything, even more than practicing the members of the family. It's just a good energizer. So make sure you have that built in or have some ideas for that in the back of your head. And finally, as you're checking your lesson plan, I want you to ask yourself why you're doing each activity. Go through each activity on that list. And if you're not sure why you're doing something, maybe you're doing it because one of your colleagues always does it. Maybe you're doing it because that's what you always did in school. But you can't think of any other reason besides that for why you're doing it, then maybe it's not really worth doing. So make sure you have a really good explanation for why you're doing each thing. Now, and then also check the time that you've devoted to it. Maybe something is worth doing, but maybe not so much time. Here's an example that I think illustrates what I'm talking about here. I've observed many classes, and in many classes, I go into the class, and for the first, sometimes 10 minutes of the class, the teacher is having one student come up and write the date on the day and the date on the board. And sometimes in certain classes at certain levels, this can take a really long time. And what are the rest of the students doing? Well, they're just kind of sitting there waiting and potentially getting bored. And there's nothing more dangerous than a room full of people who are potentially getting bored. So I ask myself, maybe I can see why it's worth writing the day and the date on the board, but is it really worth 10 minutes? Or are there potentially other things that you could be doing that are a better use of time? So make sure that what you're doing is a very good use of the small amount of time that I know we all have for teaching. Finally, you have your lesson plan all set, and when you're ready to use it, you're going through the plan and you're looking out at your students, and maybe you have another individual fill-in-the-blank activity planned, but you look out at your students and you see faces like this, like you see here in the picture. These students are, to me, they look bored, they look tired, they don't look very engaged. To me, it looks like they might need an energy boost. And so don't be afraid to veer away from the plan, to modify the plan in the moment. Maybe you need to switch the order of what you're doing, or maybe you need to do a quick stand-up, sit-down activity for a couple of minutes just to get some energy into this group, and then you can continue with your plan. So even though you have your fantastic plan, you've checked it for various things a couple of times, don't be afraid to change it in the moment when you need to. Your job as a teacher is to read the crowd, read the students, and see when it's time to modify the plan a little bit, and don't be afraid to do that. We will now begin with the lessons that I have planned for the future with Going To. Now I want to remind you that time frames will vary. Some of you teach classes of 45 minutes each time, others probably have a 2-hour class, and anything in between. And so when I created this lesson, I wasn't sure, of course, how long your classes are. For some of you, the following activities could take 2 classes. For some of you, it could take 2 weeks. So of course this will vary, but keep in mind that the sequence that I've offered here is important. That is done with some thinking behind it. There's a build-up that is important. So whether it takes you 2 classes or 2 weeks full of classes, that's up to you to determine, but the sequence is kind of important, and you'll see what I'm talking about. The first thing that I might do in a class for teaching future with Going To is, without even telling them that we're doing a grammar lesson, without even saying, okay, students, here we are about to begin the grammar portion of our class, I don't even say that. Because in my experience, as soon as students hear the word grammar, they sometimes get very nervous, or they tell themselves, oh, I'm very bad at grammar, I'm going to do very badly at this. They turn off their brains sometimes thinking that I'm not going to be interested or I'm not going to do well. So what's worked best for me is to kind of sneak it in and to get them having fun with it before they even realize that they're actually learning grammar. So in the specific case of teaching future with Going To, I would tell them a little white lie and tell them that over the weekend I went to a fortune teller. And in fact, not only did I get my own fortune, but I learned how to read the palms, read the lines on the hands of other people in order to determine their future. And so I go around and ask for the hands of several different students, and I invent some interesting things. Oh, wow, with a lot of interest. It looks like you are going to have a very long life. Oh, you in the front row, you are going to have many trips in your future. And I see that you are going to have many children. All of the students are oohing and ahhing and so interested in what you're talking about. Maybe you can have them turn to a partner and see if they can invent something about their partner's hand to get the interest sparked. After this, I would have a role play already written out, perhaps on the board already, or on a chart paper already prepared. I would have a role play that includes my grammar tense that I'm working on, in this case, the future with Going To. And I would begin at any level, from beginners to advanced. I would begin by having them listen and repeat. Let's try this together. You can repeat after me in the privacy of your own computer space. Hi there. How are you? Great, thanks. Hey, are you going to study for the test tonight? Yes, of course. How about you? Definitely. And I'm going to finish all of my homework. Good plan. My mom is going to drive me to school tomorrow. Do you want to come? Sure, thanks. See you then. Okay, thanks for listening and repeating. Now, like I said, I do the listen and repeat in any level, even if it's an advanced level. I feel that it gets students into the stress, rhythm, intonation of the language, kind of the music of the language. At any level, I think that this is a good use of time. But I've had teachers in workshops say to me, listen and repeat, isn't that kind of old news? Isn't that what people used to do? Aren't there new strategies? Isn't listen and repeat kind of old-fashioned? And I say, you know what? It is. It is old-fashioned, but it brings us back to the point that I made at the beginning of the workshop, which is, if something is working, no matter how many new great ideas there are, you don't need to throw away the ideas that are already working well. Am I going to spend my entire class listening and repeating? Of course not. But do I think that it's worth it to spend 2 minutes, perhaps, doing a listen and repeat? Absolutely. After the listen and repeat, I would move into a choral reading. Now, I want students to have a chance to do the listen and repeat and the choral reading more than one time. I really want them to be doing it several times. But if we have them doing listen and repeat and a choral reading, of course, is when you have perhaps the left side of the class being person A and the other half of the class being person B, and then the other way around. But if we have them doing this in the same old way 5, 6, 7 times, they have the potential to get bored. And so I like to think of ways to keep it interesting. So we're going to try this here together. After you've done the listen and repeat, and after you've done the choral reading in the traditional way, we want students to do it one more time, but we're going to make it a little bit different. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to the original role play, and I want you to do it this time in a whisper. And so if you're doing this, if you're watching this webinar in a group of people, you can turn quickly to a partner. One of you is partner A and one of you is partner B. If you are alone, you can do both roles. We'll go back to the role play, and on the count of 3, we are all going to say this role play together in a whisper. 1, 2, 3. Hi there, how are you? Great, thanks. Hey, are you going to study for the test tonight? Yes, of course. How about you? Definitely. And I'm going to finish all of my homework. Good plan. My mom is going to drive me to school tomorrow. Do you want to come? Sure, thanks. See you then. Now this always gets a little bit of giggles, laughing, but you can imagine that the next step, when you tell all the students that you want them to do it in a great, big, loud voice, you can imagine their excitement. So think about all kinds of silly things. You can have them do it in a scary voice. You can have them do it in an old man, an old lady voice. Whatever it is that gets your students engaged and gets them doing it again a couple more times is going to be worth your time. Okay, so we've done the listen and repeat. We've done the choral reading a few different times. And now I'd like to do something called the timed oral reading. If you're doing this in your class, this is how it would look. You have students work in pairs. Have partners take turns reading to each other for a certain amount of time. Have them mark how far they get each time. Give both partners a few turns. So the amount of turns you give the students and the amount of time that you give them will kind of depend on their level and how much time you want to devote to it. So this can be modified. For us in this case, you're going to work independently in this case, and we'll try it for 10 seconds each. We'll do it 2 times. So we'll go back to the role play. And when I say go, you'll start from the very beginning, and I'm going to time you for 10 seconds. And you're trying to see how far you can go. So you're trying to read it quickly, but you want somebody to potentially be able to understand you. So you don't want to read so quickly that it doesn't make sense. So try to find a balance between quickly but clearly. When I say go, you'll simply read it out loud as fast and as clearly as you can until I say stop. When I say stop, just try to remember where you left off, and then you'll see if you go a little bit farther next time. So on the count of 3, you'll start from the beginning. 1, 2, 3. Stop. Now you're going to get a second turn, and you're going to start from the very beginning again, start from the beginning of the role play, and see if you get any further. 1, 2, 3, go. Stop. Okay, now what I'm going to tell you is the same thing that I will tell the students every time. Sometimes students get farther the second time they read it, the third time they read it. They get farther each time, and that's great because that means that they're reading a little bit more quickly. Other times, students or webinar participants don't get farther. Sometimes they get the same distance, or maybe even they read less. And that's really okay too, because that probably means that you're reading more clearly. So in either case, no matter what happens, it's good practice, and each person has been successful at it in the way that, however they did it, in their own way. Okay, we've done listen and repeat, we've done the choral reading, we've done the timed oral reading, which of course can be done not just for reading a role play, but really any reading that you're doing. And now let's try with our students the 2-circle rotation. So you can see here in my picture that I have a small class here in the photo of just 6 people, so that I have 3 people in the inner circle facing out, and then 3 people in the outer circle facing in. So this can work in a class as small as the one that you see here in the picture, but it can also work in a class as big as 60, 70, 80 people. So the idea is that you have that same role play hanging up, posted somewhere, and they're now going to practice it with the person across from them. Notice the build-up here, because in the listen and repeat and the choral reading, the students were having the chance to read the role play out loud, but they didn't have the pressure of anyone listening to them yet. They didn't have to be nervous about anybody judging them or critiquing them, because other people were busy saying it on their own. So I think that this is a very important step. I think it can be kind of scary for students to hand them something to read and say, read it in front of the class, when they've never ever seen it before. They haven't had a chance to practice. That can make people very nervous. So give them a chance to practice it in a way that has no pressure before they actually have to do it independently. So you see here, by the time that they've done this 2-circle rotation where they're having this role play with a partner, they've already said this role play 6, 7, 8 times by now. And so now they're hopefully feeling a little bit more confident about it. So you can have them do it with a partner just like you see here in the picture, then have the outer circle rotate, inner circle stays still, and this way they get to try it with a few different people. Here's something else that you might want to try when you're doing this 2-circle rotation. These two things fit well together. The disappearing dialogue. So you have the dialogue up on the board or posted from the chart paper. The first time they can see it very clearly. It's written out exactly how you've put it. But then after you've given them a chance to practice it a couple of times, you take your eraser, and just as you see in the second picture here, you can erase a little bit of the dialogue and then erase it a little bit more each time, so that the final time that they do it, hopefully they have it memorized by then, and they're saying it a little bit more naturally each time. So by the time that they're finishing, you have the entire thing erased and they're just doing it on their own. This can be a fun activity to try, and useful because it gets them not depending on reading it, but trusting themselves to say it more naturally. So by now, really, the students have just been practicing with it without focusing too much on the format. And so now you want to bring them back to show them exactly how this works. A structured slot chart is something that you can create for any grammar tense that you're teaching. In this case, we have the structured slot chart for future with going to. And how it works is you put it up there in the chart in such a way that all a student has to do is choose a word from each column, and they are guaranteed to make a good sentence. So you can see here by the lines, if I say I know that my only choice there is to say am. And then the only option in the next column is to say going to. And then according to this chart, it looks like I can choose any one of those things in that final column, and I'm guaranteed to have a good sentence. So model this to them, give them several examples, have them listen and repeat, have the students give you a couple of examples according to the chart, and then I would keep this chart posted somewhere in the room. And so anytime in the future that a student maybe says something in the reverse order or forgets a part or something like this, uses the wrong form of to be or whatever it is, instead of repeating it back to them correctly all the time, or instead of saying, no, that's wrong, no, that's wrong, you can simply point up to the chart, and that will indicate that they need to check their order, check to be sure that they have all of the parts, and they can self-correct, and they can get into the habit of doing that. So the structured slot chart you put on the board at this point, and then I would just keep it up, keep it posted in the room somewhere for the next couple of classes. I'd like to say a couple of comments about the use of the board. So you can see in previous slides that I had a lot of writing up there on the board for the role play and then also for the structured slot chart. And writing all those words for the chart and for the role play can take a lot of time. And I know that time is limited. In fact, that's one thing that a couple of you commented about previously, is that you don't have enough time. And so we want to make the best use of the time that you do have. So if you are spending some of that time, a lot of that time, with your back to the students, writing all this stuff on the board, that's not a good use of our time. And so I suggest if you're going to have things written on the board that are that long, such as a role play or the structured slot chart, you're going to want to get to class a little bit early to put it on the whiteboard and have it there. If you're not ready for the students to look at it yet, you can always cover it up. Another great idea, if you have the possibility, is to write it on a chart paper and simply hang it up when you're ready for them to look at it, so that you're not wasting time with your back to the students writing a lot of things on the board. If you do have it on a chart paper, if you have that available to you, that's actually another reason that that's a good idea, is because you can bring it back every class and have it hanging up there again instead of needing to erase it for the next teacher. The next thing I would do, and again, note the sequence that I'm giving them more and more freedom to use this form on their own. At the beginning it was super restricted, super guided, and now I'm giving them more and more freedom to use this on their own. So the next thing that I would do with that in mind is something called action cards. And so you can see my incredible artwork here that I have on little index cards. I have a person drinking coffee, a person swimming, watching TV, playing basketball, reading a book. And again, another thing that some of you commented on was that you don't have a lot of lesson planning time, and you also don't have a lot of resources. And so you can see here by the things that I've created without using too much technology, in fact none. I just used these papers from the recycling bin, so I didn't need too many materials, and I didn't need too much time either. These drawings, although you might not believe it, didn't take too long. And so something like this is an activity that people can do even if you don't have any time for lesson planning, if you don't have any materials. You can do this. So what do? You give everyone an action card like this, a card with a picture on it, and then you have the whole class on the count of 3. You write this question on the board, what are you going to do? And you have the whole class on the count of 3 for each person to say, what are you going to do? We're imagining that what the picture that they have is what their plan is for tomorrow. So the whole class asks each student, what are you going to do? And the person looks at their picture and they answer, oh, I am going to drink coffee tomorrow. And again, if they hesitate, if you have a student who's still not really getting it, you simply point up to your structured slot chart and help them along. Also, why is it important to have everybody in the class ask the question, what are you going to do? It would be simpler, perhaps, to have you, the teacher, ask this question to each person in the class. However, if you do that, if you are just going one by one through the students, asking them the question, they answer, what are the rest of the students doing when it's not their turn? They are potentially getting bored. And as I said, there's nothing more dangerous than a room full of students who are bored because they can potentially get into mischief. So having them all ask the question every single time is not only good practice, but also a nice way to keep them engaged in the activity even when it's not their turn. Always be thinking of other ways that you can do things like this to keep everybody engaged. The next activity is called a student interview chart. In this case, I have made 3 questions using the future with going to. Of course, this is an easy thing to modify for any tense that you are working on. I hand out, in this case, every student in the class is going to need a paper like this. If you have easy access to a copying machine, a computer, and can print out the chart for each person, then that's great. If you don't, if students are just with their notebooks, you could make this part of the lesson, is to say, everybody please get out a piece of paper. You can have an example of this up on the board or on a chart paper and have everybody copy it down in just this way. And so you can actually make it part of the lesson. I do include the question, what is your name, for a very important reason. It's very important that students in the class know each other's names, and I'm always surprised when I go into classes that have been meeting together for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, months, and the students still don't know each other's names. And it's very important that they do, and it's part of your job to create opportunities for them to introduce themselves to each other and to practice with each other's names and to make sure that they know them. So this is very much included in this activity for that reason. So have them repeat all of these 4 questions back to you before they begin. What is your name? What are you going to do after class? What are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do next weekend? The task is that in a second, when you say go, they are going to need to stand up with their pencil and their paper, move around, circulate around, and interview 3 people, write down their answers, and after they have finished interviewing their 3 people and writing down their answers, they should sit down. Now you can give them a little bit of a warning before they even get started to say, when you answer the questions, I want you to be answering in a full sentence. In this way, they can be practicing with the tense that they're focusing on. Once they have all the directions clear, you can send them off to do this task. And once people have finished interviewing their 3 classmates, they will of course sit down as you've asked them to do. The next step is how to report back on the student interview chart. So I don't know about you, but sometimes when I ask students to work with a partner or work in a group, I've noticed that they don't always do it. Hopefully you don't have this challenge, but some of you, I'm afraid, might. Sometimes when you put people into partners, one person just does it by themselves, or maybe none of them really do it because they think, well, she's not really going to check all of our work anyways. And so you need to think of ways, of reasons for them to actually talk to their partner, if that's what you've asked them to do, and actually listen to their partner. So when everyone is done with their 3 interviews and they have sat down, it's important that you ask them about the people that they talk to. You don't want to ask them about themselves because they've already had the chance to talk about themselves 3 times, and you want to make sure that they get into the habit of actually talking to their partners. In addition, this gives them another form of the tense. Now they're, instead of saying, I am going to watch TV, now they're saying something like, he is going to watch TV, and so that's additional good practice. So that's just a couple suggestions about how to debrief on the information that they have just received. Next, a question activity board. This is the sort of thing that you could create for maybe the last 15 minutes of class every Friday, for example, and every week you would create different questions based on what you've been studying that week, and this could be a good review of what they've been doing. Put students into groups of probably 3 or 4 is a good number to work together, and you need to give each student dice, and then each student needs to find some small object to represent themselves to move around the board. This could be an eraser, an earring, something small that represents each person. Now remember that it might feel like you're giving a lot of instructions for this or other activities that could take a long time, but as you get into the habit of doing the same sorts of activities time and time again, if you end up doing a different version of the question activity board every week, for example, once you take it out, students already know, oh, okay, this is where she's going to have us get into groups, this is where I'm going to need my eraser or something to represent myself to move around the board. And the directions part goes a lot faster for that reason. So don't worry if you feel like the first time you do an activity you're spending a lot of time giving instructions, because it's worth it. It won't be like that every time. So this is a nice chance for students to work in groups and the teacher to be circulating around and listening to each group, and they are really sincerely working together and having a chance to practice and share ideas and use what they've learned in a pretty natural way. Incidentally, in a group, anytime you have students working in pairs or groups, there's probably going to be a pair or a group that finishes way before the other groups. And so you always need to have a plan for what you would do if this happens, because you don't want people sitting there getting bored while they wait for other people to finish, or the other way around. You don't want people starting to think, oh my goodness, every other group is done and we're not done yet, so we better rush through. So in this case, in this activity, if I notice that one group is already finished, I might say, okay, now go back and choose 3 of the questions, whatever 3 you want, and write a written answer to those 3 questions. This is something to keep them meaningfully occupied. Now when the other groups finish up, they don't necessarily have to do the written work. It's not something that I'm really needing every group to do, every person to do, but it keeps people meaningfully occupied so that when the rest of the groups do finish the main activity, we can all then move on together. What is the teacher's role during group activities? Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm in class, I get myself already thinking about the million other things that I need to be doing to prepare for my next class, my next meeting, the next day. And so when I put students into group work, the question activity board, for example, that we just saw, it can be tempting to take those 5 or 10 minutes and quick get out your lesson book or quick make a list of the things that you need to do while the students are busy. But we really need to remember that when students are in pairs or in groups, this is a very crucial time for the teacher to be making good use of that time. What should the teacher be doing? We should be circulating around to make sure students know how to complete the task. No matter how great we are about giving the directions, modeling the directions, asking for if anyone has a doubt about what they're supposed to be doing, no matter how much we do that, there are often students who still don't understand what they're supposed to be doing, but they're too nervous to ask a question in front of the whole group, and so they don't. And so it's not until they're already with their partners and looking at the paper that they think, I don't know what to do. And so it's your role to be moving around and finding those people and giving them an extra hand in getting ready to do the task. What else? You need to make yourself available for questions. Again, with the shy students, they may never, ever, no matter how much doubt they have, they may never ask a question in front of the whole class because they're shy. And so moving around, circulating around the class makes you available for questions that the students might have about the task that they're doing, or maybe about something else that they just were nervous to ask in front of the whole group. So the point is to make yourself available that the student could have your attention one-on-one in a more comfortable way. And finally, another role is to be listening for common errors that'll tell you what you need to review later. If you're circulating around and you see that everyone is answering these questions on the question activity board perfectly, 100%, they are doing it, there's no problem, that tells you that this class is ready to move on to the next thing. They got it. On the other hand, if you're circulating around and you're still hearing a lot of the same kind of mistakes, that tells you that you need extra practice and you know what you need to work on for next time. So you can either take mental notes or write down in your notebook some things that you're hearing that you need to review later. You don't need to stop people in their activity and correct them right then. You don't need to tell the whole class who exactly was making the mistake. You can just make a note to yourself and know that you have to review them all together another time. Next, another possibility is a student-created role play. So they've had a lot of experience doing the role play that you created for them. We did it in a lot of different ways. And now, to give them a chance to be a little bit creative, you might put them in pairs and have them create their own dialogue. Now, in the past, I've had students have this activity pretty open. Just say, okay, I want you to create a dialogue with your partner using the future with going to. For some people that works. For other people, I've noticed that those directions are a little bit too wide open, a little bit too vague, and they sit there not knowing how to get started with it. And so something that's helped me, that might help you, is to give them a sentence or two or three that they must include in their dialogue. This gives them a starting point. So you can say, okay, you and your partner are going to create a dialogue. Both of you must have a role. You're both going to have to talk. And you must include these 3 sentences. He is going to be mad, I'm going to buy it, and they are going to get hurt. And this can make it kind of funny because all of the groups in the class are needing to include these same sentences, but they all do it in a slightly different way, which makes it kind of interesting and gives them, just like I said, a little bit more guidance to help them get it done. I would also, no matter what kind of task you're giving the students, I would give them a set amount of time. For example, for this, you're going to have 3 minutes to do this kind of task. Otherwise, you might have people putting too much into it, getting ready to write a 2-page thing that's going to take too long. So give them an estimate about how long they're going to have to do each activity. Now, what are you going to do with their work? Again, if you have a big class, I recognize that it can be a little bit agonizing to listen to each pair. You could potentially be listening to 20, 30 different pairs of students tell their dialogue. And that can be boring for the other students and for the teacher too, to listen to each and every single one. However, you don't want to get into the habit of asking students to do something and then never doing anything with their work, because then students learn, oh, we don't really have to do this because she's not going to collect it and she's not even going to necessarily ask us to perform it. So that's not what you want either. So something in the middle that I found is a good balance between those two things is something that I call 2s to 4s. So this means that after each pair has completed their dialogue, they've written it down, they're going to stay with their partner and share that dialogue with another pair. So now the 2 people, as the name indicates, the 2 people become 4 people. So they're working together with another group of partners, and they each share their dialogue back and forth. Perhaps you could give them a chance to share it with even one more set of people. So once they finish with the first set of partners, okay, say goodbye, and then go try to find another set of partners and do their role play, perform it one more time for the next group. In this way, everybody gets a chance to share their work. You are mingling around listening to people, so you do get a chance to make sure that everyone's done it and how they're doing with it, but everyone is occupied at the same time, and that really is a major goal. Whenever you're doing a new idea, maybe you hear a new idea in a workshop, a webinar, from a colleague, from a book that you have a new idea and you're ready to try it, you think this is going to be great, we're going to do this tomorrow. Don't be afraid if it doesn't work perfectly the first time. In fact, a lot of times with a new activity, a new idea, a lot of times it doesn't work perfectly the first time, and there are a lot of reasons why that might be. So if it doesn't work perfectly the first time, try to analyze why and make modifications. So maybe your directions weren't clear. Maybe you can think about a better way to give the instructions for the activity. Maybe this was too easy, or maybe it was too difficult for the students. Who knows? Think about why maybe it didn't work and see if you can make a change for the next time. Also, students who are not used to doing any kind of interactive work, they're not used to sharing their opinions, they're not used to working with a partner, they're not used to being silly in class, if they've never been asked to do any of those things that I just said before, it's going to take them a while to get used to it. I can remember an exact example of I had a new group of Chinese students, and my icebreaker for the activity was a silly name game that involved all of them standing up and doing something kind of silly. And when I gave them the instructions and I told them what to do, all of them just sat there. They didn't even stand up slowly and kind of do it without energy. They literally sat there and didn't do it at all. And the reason is because none of them had ever been asked to do something silly or to do something in order to learn each other's names before. They were ready for me to say, get out your books and turn to page 2. That's what they were used to and comfortable with. And so I didn't panic. I said, okay, you know what? Let's start with getting out your books and turning to page 2. And then I slowly introduced the kinds of things, my style of teaching, bit by bit. And believe me, by the end of the semester, they were interacting, they were using their own ideas, but it does sometimes take time. So don't panic. Keep trying. People will get used to it, and you'll get better about giving the directions and making sure that you have appropriate activities for the level that you're teaching. So keep trying new ideas. Don't throw them out right away. I'd like to give some additional possibilities for continued practice with this tense, and of course you can modify it for any other grammar point that you're teaching. A couple different kinds of dictations, either the standard dictation, where the students all get out a piece of paper and you read them several sentences and they copy it down. This could be a great thing to do. Make it related to what you're doing. In this case, you have sentences related to the future with going to. Another possibility is a modification of the standard dictation, which is the running dictation. And I have that explained point by point in the next slide, and so later after the webinar, if you'd like to review back to exactly how this worked, you can of course have access to this on the Ning. But basically how it works is you post sentences all around the room and you assign partners to a different paper posted in the room. One of the people in the pairs is the reader and one of them is the writer. So the job of the reader is to walk over to their assigned paper, read sentence number 1, walk back to their partner, and their partner has to write down the sentence. And they go back and forth until they're able to complete this task. It's a race, and so it's kind of fun. People are moving around very quickly, trying to get things done. And this is a great way to incorporate all of the 4 skills. There's some listening, there's some speaking, there's some reading, there's some writing, all involved in this activity. As I said, here's the detailed explanation of this, so you can go back and read that more carefully later. But one comment that I did want to make is to go back to the question of what happens when one student or group finishes long before the others. Remember I was talking about this in the example of the question activity board? And it's the same thing for any activity. So let's say they're doing the running dictation and one set of partners finishes and the other people are still going back and forth. The first group that finishes could get bored if they have nothing to do, and the people that are still working could start to get nervous. Oh my goodness, everyone else is finishing and we haven't. Let's just rush or skip or something so that we can be done too. You don't want to create that scenario. So in this case, you might say, okay, well, I noticed that this group of partners is already done. Go ahead and take down your paper and start correcting your work, for example. Or if there's still more time, you can say, okay, recopy each of these sentences, write them again, something to keep them meaningfully occupied so that the rest of the students can finish in a relaxed way. A mix and mingle activity. Again, this is giving students more and more freedom to be able to use this on their own. This is where you write down some questions related to your grammar point on the board. I have this activity explained very carefully here on this slide. You're going to write level appropriate question on the board, read it aloud to the group, have students stand up, find a partner, and ask and answer the question. So it could be something such as, what are you going to do this weekend? And the partners answer. After it seems like most of the pairs have finished, they both asked and answered the question, ask them to say goodbye and find a new partner. Second question, second partner. Third question, third partner, in the same way. And like we said, after all the students have answered these questions, you want to get feedback about what the people's partners told them. For example, what did Sonia do last night? What did Felipe do last weekend? So that you're hearing about what the partners did, not what they did, again. Making sure they actually listen to their partner. Remember the accuracy versus fluency comment I made at the beginning of the webinar? I was talking about how sometimes it's important to make sure that students are accurately using the tense that you're working on, and other times it's important to just get them talking. And so in this example of the mix and mingle, this is a chance for students to just talk. Maybe they're making mistakes, maybe they're not, and really at this point it doesn't really matter because we want them to be having fun with it and really using it. So that's why this is important. And of course, as I said, remember to ask students what their partner's answer was afterwards. The mix and mingle explanation will also be available on the Ning that you can see afterwards. For homework, you might give a related journal prompt. So in this case, you might have them for homework write the answer to the question about what are they going to do this summer. A couple comments about homework. I've taught in many settings where students are in class all day or working all day and coming to class at the end of the night, and they have a lot of work, school, family responsibilities, and I've been tempted to think, wow, they have so much going on that I don't know if I should force them to do homework. And I've realized that even just a quick 10-minute homework assignment can get them thinking about it and give you a way to check to see their understanding. And so I think even if it's a quick homework assignment, for people who are very, very busy, I think it's worth doing. And keeping it connected with what you're doing in class is, of course, important. What to do with the homework? I know a lot of you don't have a lot of time for lesson planning or correcting work, things like this. And so sometimes you could almost, I know that I've done it in the past, I've resisted giving homework simply for the reason that I don't have the time to check it all. And you don't want to be creating more work for yourself if you simply don't have it. And so, yes, sometimes you do want to check the work independently, but other times there's other ways to check the homework or to do something with the homework without necessarily taking it home and reading carefully through each person's work. And so you might do something such as the 2s to 4s where they share it with a partner, or some other creative way to do something with the homework. You want to do something with it so students have motivation to do it each time, but maybe a way to make it easier for you so that you're not loading yourself down with more work. At this point, you've done so many activities, the students are totally engaged with what they're doing. They're totally ready for doing it. They're able to succeed at it because you set them up to be ready. And so this could be a good chance for them to do a related fill-in-the-blank exercise or some other activity that you have in the book. I know a lot of you commented to me that one of the challenges is that you want to do interactive things, you want to get the students having fun with it, but you must get through Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 by the end of the week. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem with your administrator. And so you say, I don't know if I can do interactive stuff because I have to use the book. And I recognize that challenge. And so with today's webinar, I'm not suggesting that you throw away the book altogether. I'm thinking about ways that you could blend them together, because now they are ready. You have warmed them up to be ready for the book activity, and you can see these happy students are now prepared to do it. And so now you could take it out and say, okay, everyone is going to independently do activities 1, 2, and 3, something like this, and now they are absolutely ready to do it. Another idea is, as another way to modify the book work to make it a little bit more interactive, is that you could take a question from the book and write it on chart paper and post it around the room, and students can circulate around and answer the questions so they all get to see each other's answers. And you get to do the same thing that the book suggests, but perhaps in a way that gets them moving around and interacting with each other a little bit. You could also modify the questions a little bit to relate to their real life, and everyone always likes talking about their real life and their real plans, so that's a nice thing to add. And also, this kind of activity is nice for the beginning of class. I don't know about you, but I sometimes have latecomers, people who come into class 5 minutes, 10 minutes late, and this can be challenging because I think I know half of the class is always going to come in late. And so I want to start on time because the other half of the class is here, but I don't want to start with something that's so crucial that I'm going to have to repeat myself when half of the class comes in 5 minutes. So you want to think of a good, meaningful way to use the time of the people that are there, and the kind of thing that people, as they come in late, they could join into very easily and be able to make a good guess about what everyone's doing without having to give a complicated explanation. So an activity like this, a few questions posted around the room and people are circulating around answering each one, that could be a good thing to do to solve this issue. I'd like to make a couple of comments about giving directions. We've gone through a couple of activities here today, and some of them might be totally different than the students have ever done before, and they're going to require some instruction. And so even the best activity in the world is going to be no good if the students haven't clearly understood the instructions before getting started. So here are some suggestions. Make sure you have everyone's attention. If you start giving the instructions when some of the people are still talking in the back of the room, it's not going to work. So really make sure that everybody's quiet and get students into the habit of knowing that you're not going to start talking until you have everyone's attention. Give clear, concise, step-by-step directions for what they're going to do. You don't need too many fillers and too much explanation. Just give the bare minimum, clear steps. Model what you want them to do. Show them exactly. You could get a student up there to model it with you, exactly what you want them to do. Let students know what they should do when they're finished. I found that this is a common challenge. I tell students what to do, and then I just feel like there's chaos at the end, and I wonder why. And I think a lot of the chaos could come from the fact that students don't know what to do when they're done, and so they stand there just talking about something else, talking about their weekend or talking about something unrelated. And so in your instructions, make sure that they know what they're supposed to do when they're finished. After you have finished interviewing your 3 partners, you should sit down and put down your pencil, something like this. The final tip for giving directions is after you think that you've given your directions as clearly as you can and modeled it, ask some comprehension questions about your directions before beginning the activity. This might seem a little bit silly, but in my experience, it's been worth it to ask just a couple of simple questions. For example, how many people are you going to talk to for this activity? Are you going to be standing up or sitting down for this activity? What should you do when you're done? Questions like this can give you an idea of how much people have understood and give people a review. There's nothing more chaotic than saying ready, steady, go, and having half the class not doing anything, another group doing the wrong thing, and another class doing it correctly, another group doing it correctly. So you really want to make sure before you say go that everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing, and these tips I think could help. Here's a question for you. Informal English. We all know that going to often gets reduced to gonna. And so I'm wondering what you think about this. Should we teach this? I've had a lot of students or a lot of teachers respond to me, well, that's wrong. Gonna is not grammatically correct. I don't think we should teach this. I'm seeing a lot of comments here in the chat box. Some saying that, yes, of course we should because they're going to hear it. Others saying, no, that's not right. We're setting them up for failing. So thank you for your comments. In my opinion, we need to do a little bit of both. And here's what I would do. I would introduce this format grammatically correctly, introduce it in just the way that I've just instructed with the structured slot chart, giving the going to explanation and having them answer in full sentences using going to. Up until this moment, I would teach them the correct grammatical way all throughout all the activities that I've just done. But then I would also say, before moving on, before moving away from this tense, I would also introduce this form, this gonna form, to students, because this is the kind of thing that's so common, super common, that I think that even if they choose not to use it, that they are absolutely going to hear it. And so they should learn to recognize it. So in my case, in my opinion, I would teach it at the end. I would introduce them to it and have them make the choice if they're going to use it or not. But at least let them know, with something so common as this, know how to recognize it. You know what? I might even practice with it for a couple of activities or a couple of listen and repeats so that they know how they should use it, quote unquote, correctly. But I would make sure that they know that this is not grammatically correct. They shouldn't write it. It is informal, but they will hear it. Now is the point in a workshop or webinar where some of you might be thinking, but Vicki, I don't need to teach going to. I'm a teacher who teaches more advanced tenses. I teach the future perfect. I'm teaching modals. Tomorrow I have to teach conditionals. And here I've just spent the last hour talking about future with going to, and that's not something that I need to teach. How am I supposed to teach the following? And so I'll remind you that although my examples were with going to, I had to choose something. Almost all of the activities that we discussed today can absolutely easily be modified for different tenses, different topics, different themes, different levels. And so if you are thinking about it and still not coming up with how you would do a different tense, you can either send in what you need to be teaching right now. If it comes to me right away, I can make a couple comments about it, but probably the best thing is to definitely bring your comments to the Ning, and if you can't think of how you could modify something to fit what you're teaching tomorrow or the next day or whatever you have questions about, run it by me and we can talk about it together and think about ways to adapt what I've talked about today to make it work for you. I want everyone to leave this webinar thinking that they have information and ideas and inspiration that they can use immediately. So if you don't feel like you can yet, come to the Ning and we'll make sure that that happens. What about error correction? So this is a challenging and funny thing because in a class of 10 people, let's say, one person might make the same error as the next student, and with the first student, you let it go, you don't correct it, you ignore it, and in the second student, you do correct it. And it's always a judgment call, thinking about when and why and with whom you're going to make the same correction. So for student A, maybe for them, wow, for them what they said was really good. That was new for them and they're really trying, and for them maybe you were able to understand it, maybe it wasn't perfect, but you'll let it go in this case. For the second student, maybe you know that they are capable of doing better than that, and you know that they're capable of getting it right, and so in that case you would correct it. So it's always a judgment call, thinking about who you're going to correct, when, why, what. My simple answer for knowing if I'm going to correct something is asking myself, have I taught this before? Have I spent the last 2 weeks talking about the irregular past tense, and then a student comes to me and says, oh, last weekend, Vicki, I go to the store. If I know we've taught it, I know they can do it, then I'm going to give them a chance to say it again. I'm going to ask them to try again and try to get it right. Especially if I know the abilities of each of my students, which hopefully we do. I know if this is the best this student can do right now. And if it's not, and I have taught it, that's when I'm going to make a correction. So I'd like your opinions about this because, like I said, error correction can be kind of a tricky thing, a judgment call. And so I'm wondering, if you have determined that you do really need to correct something, how are you going to do it? And so I'm looking for your ideas here. Please send that into the chat box. How do you make a correction? I'm seeing some responses here. Some people say you need to say it right in the moment. Other people are saying save it and review it with the group afterwards. Okay, thanks for your ideas. So again, I think there's no right or wrong answer to this question. I think it is a judgment call. It depends on what the students are doing. Sometimes you do want to stop the student right there and repeat it correctly or give them a chance to say it again correctly. Other times, if they're in, let's say, a conversation with a partner, you're really looking for fluency here in this activity, you really just want to get them talking, you don't necessarily want to stop them every 30 seconds to make a correction, you just want to get them talking. In that case, you might just remember it, write it down later on the board for everyone to repeat, or even write it down in your notebook and know that, okay, all these students, 90% of my students are still having problems with the irregular past tense, and so it's not just one thing that I need to correct. This is a whole new lesson that I need to do again because a lot of students are having problems with this. So you need to decide if you're going to correct something, and if you've decided to, you then need to think about how you're going to correct it, and each day, each student, each scenario is different. All of the most fantastic ideas in the world, the best lessons in the world, are no good if you don't have good classroom management. My first year teaching, I was teaching primary school ESL, and I had students from ages 5 to 15 in my class, all different levels. Brothers and sisters were in the same class. It was a big class. Really, I can tell you that thinking back, it was a zoo. It was a zoo. And I look back and I think, wow, that was a crazy year. But what I'm grateful for is that whether I taught them any English or not, I'm really not sure. But what I did learn a lot myself is about good classroom management. And that has been helpful for me in all of the future classes that I've taught. So no great activity is going to be worth your time if you don't have a good control of the discipline in your class. And here are some tips for that. We need to practice routines until students get it right. So let's say that you're asking students to line up at the door because it's time to go to recess. Let's say, just as an example, it's time to go out to play, and you ask them to light up at the door, and you even model what you want it to look like, but they're just pushing each other, they're touching each other, they're taking a long time, they're talking too much, it doesn't look like you want it to look. Okay. Well, my students, I would say that actually isn't what a good line looks like, and so we're going to sit down and we're going to try it again. Show them again what you think a good line should look like, and even if you have to practice that line 10 times, even if they never make it to recess, even if it feels like, oh my goodness, I'm not doing anything today except for practicing getting these students in line, that's okay. It's worth your time, because the next time you ask them to get in line tomorrow, I'm pretty sure they're going to do it. And so it's worth it. Practice it, even if it's practicing it 10 times, until they get it right, until it looks like you want it to look. If you don't do that, if you say, oh God, this is a really bad line, you're really not doing it how I wanted you to do, but fine, we have to go to recess, so let's go. You can be sure that tomorrow it's going to look the same way. So don't accept it unless it's perfect. You can have students earn rewards. On my very most challenging teaching day in the class that I was telling you about, I thought I was going to go crazy, but instead of going crazy, I went out after school and I bought a new box of Legos, a new toy, essentially, for the class. These were younger students. And so I went into the class the next day and I said, wow, I have bought this new toy for you. It doesn't necessarily need to be something that you buy either. It could be something like an extra recess or an extra project or something, whatever you think that might be fun for them. And say, I would really like to let you do this activity at the end of the week, and here are the things that I'm going to need to see in order to be sure that happens. And so they can earn points as a class, and if they do it, great. They can have the prize, and if they don't do it, well, maybe you can talk about it, how they can do better for the next week. Finally, when student behavior isn't what you need it to be, ask yourself why. It could be that the activity is too easy, too difficult. Did they not understand the directions? Were they given too much time to do something, and because of that they were getting bored? Whatever didn't go well, analyze why and think about what you can do differently for the next time. The best thing that we can do as teachers to become better, even more importantly than more professional development opportunities, even more importantly than more training, in my opinion, the most important thing that we can do to improve is having self-reflection after every class. So I'm a person who likes to write things down. I have a little teaching journal. I like to answer these questions in it. If you're a person who likes to write things down, you can do that too. If you'd prefer to just think about it, if you'd prefer to talk about it with a colleague, whatever works for you is fine. The questions are basically, what went well and why? What didn't go as well and why not? And what is one very specific thing I will change for next time? So you'll either think about these, talk about these, or write them down. In the chat box right now, I'd like you to think about a recent class that you've had and share your self-reflection. What went well, what didn't, and what would you change? We'll take 1 minute for this. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your responses. The next thing is goal setting. Now, in teaching, as in the rest of your life, we are more likely to accomplish our goals if we know what they are. What are our goals? And so what I want you to do is think about one very specific goal for this year. And then I want you to think about 3 very specific steps you will take to help you get there. And so I have an example here that I'd like you to see before you do your own. Example of goal setting. Here's my goal. I want to get students talking more in class. Okay, that's a good goal, but I want to think now specifically about what are my steps to get there. Here are my examples. In order to get students talking more in class, we will sing a song together every Friday. I will do 1 pair share every class. We will do 1 question activity board per week. Those are the steps that will guide me to my goal. And so when we're finished with this webinar, when all this is still fresh in your mind, I want you to take 5 minutes of uninterrupted time and go ahead and write down your goals and your specific steps for the year, and keep that in a very nice place, special spot where you can check in with yourself once in a while to be sure you're working toward your goals. Finally, none of the best ideas, none of the best lesson plans, none of this is going to be effective if you are burnt out, if you're tired, if you're uninspired. You need to be sure that you are taking care of you. So make time for yourself, figure out a way to keep things fresh and interesting. Even if it's just having a cup of tea or taking a couple extra deep breaths on your way home from school, something that's just for you is a very important thing to do. Congratulate yourself on all of the excellent work you're doing, and remember what an important difference you're making for people. And that's going to help you keep fresh and keep inspired and keep inspiring those around you.